You'll never be anything. Without me, you're just a loser. Those words echoed in my empty apartment as the door slammed behind Marcus. I stood frozen in our, now my, living room, surrounded by the life we'd built together over 3 years. A life that had just imploded in the span of a 20-minute conversation. I'd known something was wrong when he came home that night. There was a strange energy about him, a mixture of guilt and relief that I'd seen building for weeks but had desperately tried to ignore. What I hadn't expected was Kira's name to come tumbling out of his mouth. Kira, my best friend since college, the maid of honor at our would-be wedding, the person who'd held my hair back when morning sickness from the pregnancy I'd later lose had left me huddled over the toilet. It just happened, Indy, he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. We didn't mean for it to, but there's something real between us. Something real. As if what we had, what I'd sacrificed for, had been a fiction, I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and let the tears come. Not delicate, cinematic tears, but ugly, guttural sobs that left me gasping for air. Our apartment, the one I'd been working double shifts to afford while Marcus found himself, suddenly felt like a museum of my own naivety. There was the desk where I'd stayed up late working on freelance graphic design projects after my regular job, just to make rent while Marcus used our savings for his 3rd attempt at starting a band. The kitchen where I'd meal prepped on Sundays to save money, packing his lunches with little notes of encouragement. The bedroom where I'd held him through his existential crises about turning 30 without making it, assuring him that his breakthrough was just around the corner, and all the while, I'd put my own dreams on hold. The business plan for my app idea gathered dust in a folder on my laptop. The coding classes I'd started taking were abandoned when Marcus needed me to pick up more hours at the cafe. My life had become a support system for his ambitions, and now he was gone, with my best friend, no less, leaving me with nothing but his contempt. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, the tears stopped. Not because the pain had subsided, but because something else was taking its place, a cold, clarifying anger that made my hands stop shaking and my breathing steady. I pulled myself up and walked to the bathroom, flicking on the harsh fluorescent light. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, eyes swollen, mascara streaked down hollow cheeks, hair limp from too many skipped salon appointments because we needed to budget. When had I become this ghost of myself? My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Kira. I'm so sorry, Indy. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. I hope someday you can forgive us both. I deleted the message without responding. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled to Mom. My finger hovered over the call button. Pride kept me from pressing it. I couldn't bear to tell my mother, who had warned me about Marcus from the beginning, that she'd been right. That I'd wasted 3 years of my life on a man who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone, a safety net, a placeholder until something better came along. Instead, I called my landlord. Mr. Patel? It's Indigo Walsh from 3B. I need to break my lease. Miss Walsh? But you just renewed last month. There's a penalty, I know. I'll pay it. I just need to be out by the end of the month. There was a pause on the line. Mr. Patel had always liked me. I was quiet, paid on time, and had once helped his daughter with her college applications. Is everything okay, Miss Walsh? No, I said, surprising myself with my honesty. But it will be. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and navigated to the folder labeled Nexus, the app idea I'd abandoned a year ago. It was a platform designed to connect female entrepreneurs with mentors, investors, and each other. I'd been passionate about it once, before Marcus had dismissed it as too niche and probably not profitable. I stared at the business plan I'd drafted, the market research I'd compiled, the wireframes I'd designed. It wasn't just an idea, it was a vision. My vision. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine pursuing it. The practical part of my brain immediately protested. I had barely enough savings to cover the lease-breaking penalty, let alone fund a startup. I had no team, no investors, and a resume gap that would make traditional employment difficult to find immediately. But as I sat there in my soon-to-be ex-apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of a relationship built on my own self-erasure, I made a decision. I would rather fail spectacularly at building something of my own than succeed at being someone else's support system. Opened a new document and began to type Nexus, 90-day launch plan at the top. I added a quote. Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. J.K. Rowling. 3 days later, I was on a bus to Austin, Texas, a city I'd visited once for a tech conference and had fallen in love with. I had 2 suitcases, my laptop, $3,427 in savings, and a sublet agreement for a tiny studio apartment in a part of town that my mother would have nightmares about if she knew. As the bus pulled away from the station, I looked out the window at the city I was leaving behind. Somewhere in those streets, Marcus and Kira were probably already building their new life together, perhaps even laughing about poor, pathetic Indy who had been so easy to discard. You'll never be anything. Without me, you're just a loser. His words still burned, but now they fueled something different, not despair, but determination. Because in that moment, staring out at the passing landscape as I headed toward an uncertain future, I made myself a promise: I would become everything he said I couldn't be, and I would do it without him. Austin greeted me with sweltering heat and indifference. My studio apartment was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette that consisted of a mini fridge, a hot plate, and a sink that dripped constantly. The air conditioning worked sporadically at best, and the Wi-Fi signal dropped every time it rained. But it was mine, a space untouched by Marcus's presence or memories. Gave myself exactly 1 week to wallow. 7 days of takeout containers piling up, of crying in the shower, of ignoring calls from my mother and scrolling through Kira's Instagram to torture myself with glimpses of her and Marcus together. On the 8th day, I woke up at 5 a.m., cleaned my apartment from top to bottom, and walked to a coffee shop 6 blocks away. I'd like an application, I told the barista, a girl with blue hair and more piercings than I could count. We're not hiring, she said, barely looking up from the espresso machine. You will be, I replied with more confidence than I felt. I'll check back next week. I spent that day applying to every coffee shop, restaurant, and retail store within walking distance of my apartment. By sunset, I had 3 interviews scheduled and a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, I could actually do this. 2 days later, I was hired at Cosmic Coffee, working the 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it came with free coffee and day-old pastries. More importantly, it left my afternoons and evenings free to work on Nexus. My routine became mechanical: wake at 4 a.m., work until 1 p.m., come home and nap for an hour, then work on my business plan until midnight. Rinse and repeat. The exhaustion was constant, but oddly comforting. When you're too tired to think, you're too tired to dwell on heartbreak. The first real breakthrough came 3 weeks after I arrived in Austin. I was serving coffee to a woman in a crisp blazer who was typing furiously on her laptop. Deadline? I asked as I refilled her cup. She looked up, momentarily startled, as if she'd forgotten there were other people in the world. Pitch deck. I'm presenting to investors tomorrow, and the numbers aren't adding up. Something in her frazzled determination reminded me of myself. Before I could overthink it, I said, I'm pretty good with numbers. I could take a look if you want. She laughed, but it wasn't unkind. Thanks, but unless you have an MBA in finance, I don't, I interrupted. But I did build a predictive model for customer acquisition costs for my own startup plan. It might be similar to what you're working on. She studied me for a long moment, then turned her laptop around. Show me. Her name was Vanessa Chen, and she was the founder of a sustainable fashion tech company. We spent 2 hours going through her financial projections, finding a calculation error that had been throwing off her entire model. When we finished, she handed me her business card. I owe you a coffee that doesn't come from where you work, she said. And maybe a conversation about this startup of yours. That coffee turned into a weekly meetup. Vanessa became my first mentor, helping me refine my business plan, introducing me to other founders, and eventually inviting me to a women's entrepreneurship meetup called The Hive. The Hive changed everything. Suddenly, I was surrounded by women who didn't look at me like I was crazy when I talked about my vision for Nexus. They asked tough questions, offered constructive feedback, and most importantly, took me seriously through The Hive. I met Zoe Blackwell, a brilliant developer who had recently been passed over for promotion at her tech firm in favor of a less qualified male colleague. Over margaritas one night, I showed her my wireframes for Nexus. "This is good," she said, flipping through my sketches. "Really good. But you need a technical co-founder." "I know," I sighed. "I've been teaching myself to code, but—" "I meant me," she interrupted. "I want in." I nearly choked on my drink. "Seriously? But you have a stable job, benefits, and a boss who thinks women are better at communication roles than coding," she finished. "I'm ready for something new. Something that matters." 2 days later, we signed a co-founder agreement on the back of a napkin at the same bar. Zoe would handle the technical development, I would manage the business side and user experience design. We'd split equity 60/40, with me retaining the majority as the original founder. With Zoe on board, Nexus began to take shape. We worked nights and weekends, building a prototype while still keeping our day jobs. My tiny apartment became our headquarters. With whiteboards leaning against every wall and sticky notes covering the refrigerator. 4 months after arriving in Austin, I quit Cosmic Coffee. We'd secured a small pre-seed investment from a female angel investor. Vanessa had introduced us to, not enough to pay ourselves real salaries, but enough to cover my rent and food while we worked full-time on Nexus. The night before our beta launch, Zoe and I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and energy drink cans. "What if no one signs up?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been haunting me for weeks. Zoe shrugged. "Then we pivot and try again. That's what startups do." "What if Marcus was right? What if I'm not cut out for this?" She looked at me then, her expression serious. "Indy, in the 6 months I've known you, you've moved to a new city alone, worked a shit job while building a business plan, convinced me to quit my cushy tech job, and secured our first investment. You're the most determined person I've ever met." I smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thanks, Zoe. Besides," she added, "proving your ex wrong is a pretty powerful motivator. I should know, I named my first major code deployment after my cheating college boyfriend. Nothing like spite to fuel innovation." We laughed, and for the first time since Marcus had walked out, I felt something like hope, not the desperate, clinging hope of someone waiting to be rescued, but the solid, grounded hope of someone building her own salvation. The next morning, we launched the Nexus beta to our waitlist of 200 women, mostly friends, connections from the Hive, and people we'd met at networking events. By midnight, we had 189 active users and a list of feature requests longer than my arm. 2 weeks later, TechCrunch published an article about female-founded startups disrupting the entrepreneurship space. Nexus was mentioned in the 3rd paragraph. Our user count jumped to 1,500 overnight. 1 year after Marcus told me I'd never be anything without him, Nexus closed its seed round. 1.2 million from a women-led venture capital firm with a focus on diverse founders, by investment value at 5 million. Pre-money, I celebrated by buying a bottle of champagne I couldn't afford and calling my mother. "Mom," I said when she answered, "I have something to tell you." As I shared my news, I realized that for the first time in a very long time, Marcus's voice in my head had gone silent. The words that had once cut so deep, "You'll never be anything without me, you're just a loser," had lost their power because I had proven them wrong. 2 years after our seed round, Nexus had evolved from a simple networking platform into a comprehensive ecosystem for women in business. We'd added a funding marketplace connecting female founders with investors, a mentorship program, and a suite of tools specifically designed for women-led startups. Our user base had grown to over 100,000 active members across the country, and we'd expanded our team to 28 employees, 21 of whom were women. Our series of funding round closed at $12 million, valuing Nexus at $60 million. The day the wire transfer hit our company account, I sat alone in my office, a real office now, in a converted warehouse in East Austin with exposed brick walls and too many plants, and cried. Not from sadness or even joy, but from a profound sense of vindication. I'd done it. We'd done it. Against all odds, against all predictions, especially Marcus's, we'd built something valuable, something that mattered. The press started calling. First the local Austin Business Journal, then TechCrunch again, then Forbes. The woman revolutionizing female entrepreneurship read one headline. How Indigo Walsh built a $60 million company in under 3 years. Read another, hired a PR firm to help manage the sudden attention. My face appeared on podcasts, in magazine features, on panels at conferences I'd once dreamed of merely attending. I spoke about resilience, about the unique challenges women face in business, about the importance of community. I never mentioned Marcus by name, but his shadow lingered in every success story I shared. What drove you to start Nexus? Interviewers would inevitably ask. A gap in the market, I'd reply with a practiced smile. And a personal understanding of how isolating entrepreneurship can be, especially for women. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The whole truth was messier, more personal, that Nexus had been born from the ashes of my self-worth, that each milestone was both a business achievement and a middle finger to the man who'd told me I was nothing without him. My personal life, meanwhile, remained largely non-existent. I dated occasionally, a venture capitalist who talked too much about himself, a fellow founder who couldn't handle my work schedule, a lawyer who wanted more commitment than I was ready to give. None of them lasted more than a few months. Nexus was my priority, my passion, my redemption story. Zoe worried about me. You need a life outside this company, she'd say during our weekly co-founder dinners. We've built something sustainable. Now, you can ease up a little. But easing up felt dangerous, like inviting complacency. Success was still too new, too fragile to take for granted. Then came the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Seeing my name there, Indigo Walsh, 27, founder and CEO of Nexus, was surreal. The photo shoot that accompanied the feature was even more so. Me in a power suit I would have never been able to afford 3 years ago, standing confidently in our office, the Austin skyline visible through the windows behind me. The day the issue hit newsstands, my mother called in tears. "I'm so proud of you, Indy," she said. "I always knew you were meant for great things." That night, alone in my new condo, a far cry from the tiny studio I'd started in, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. I opened a bottle of expensive champagne and scrolled through old photos on my phone, stopping at the last picture Marcus and I had taken together. We were at a friend's wedding, his arm around my waist, both of us smiling. I looked happy but somehow diminished, as if I were trying to take up less space. Barely recognized that version of myself now, deleted the photo and poured another glass of champagne. As I did, my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. "Marcus Donovan has viewed your profile." My heart stuttered. After nearly 3 years of silence, this digital ghost from my past had suddenly materialized. I clicked on the notification, navigating to his profile before I could talk myself out of it. His profile picture showed him in a button-up shirt, trying too hard to look professional. His employment history told a story of instability: 3 different jobs in the past 3 years, none lasting more than 10 months. His current position was listed as sales associate at Tech Dynamics, a mid-tier software company known for its revolving door of employees. I closed the app, unsettled. Why was he looking me up now? Had he seen the Forbes feature? Did he know about Nexus's success? I got my answer the next morning in the form of an email, from marcus.donovan@gmail.com to indigo@nexusnetwork.com. Subject: Reconnecting Indy. I know this is probably the last email you expected to receive. It's been a long time, and I'm sure you've moved on with your life. I've seen the news about your success with Nexus. Congratulations, it's truly impressive what you've built. I'm reaching out because I find myself at a crossroads professionally. The truth is, I've been struggling to find my footing since we parted ways. I've had a series of jobs that haven't worked out, and I'm looking for something more meaningful, more stable. I saw that Nexus is hiring for a business development position. I know this is a long shot, but I wanted to ask if you'd consider my application. I've gained valuable sales experience over the past few years, and I believe I could bring real value to your team. Understand if this is too awkward or if there's too much history between us. But I thought it was worth asking. People change, Indy. I've changed. Hope to hear from you, Marcus P.S. Things didn't work out with Kira. We split up about a year after everything. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how things ended between us. I was in a bad place and said things I deeply regret. I read the email 3 times, each reading bringing a new emotion: shock, then anger, then a strange, hollow amusement. Marcus, the man who had left me for my best friend, who had told me I'd never amount to anything without him, was now asking me for a job. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. Forwarded the email to Zoe with no comment. She responded within minutes, "Is this for real?" The audacity. Please tell me you're not considering this. I wasn't. Of course I wasn't. And yet, a small, vindictive part of me wanted to see him squirm, wanted him to sit across from me in an interview room and acknowledge how spectacularly wrong he'd been about me. Before I could reply to Zoe, another email arrived. From marcus.donovan@gmail.com to indigo@nexusnetwork.com. Subject: Reconnecting Indy. I realize my last email might have come as a shock. I should have been more direct. The truth is, I'm in a difficult financial situation. Tech Dynamics is downsizing, and my position is being eliminated next month. I have rent due, student loans, and credit card debt that's spiraling. I wouldn't be reaching out if I weren't desperate. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. But if there's any way you could consider meeting with me, not even about a job, just to talk, I would be incredibly grateful. Marcus, the desperation in his message was palpable, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then I remembered the night he left, the casual cruelty of his parting words, the months of depression that followed. I closed my laptop without responding and went to my afternoon meetings. But Marcus's emails lingered in my mind, an unwelcome intrusion into the life I'd carefully built without him. That evening, as I was leaving the office, my assistant stopped me. "There's someone waiting for you in reception," she said, her expression concerned. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he insists it's important." A Marcus Donovan? My blood ran cold. He was here. In my office. The past I'd worked so hard to outrun had finally caught up with me. "Should I call security?" my assistant asked, clearly sensing my distress. I took a deep breath, straightening my shoulders. "No," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I'll handle this." As I walked toward reception, I felt a strange calm settle over me. 3 years ago, Marcus had held all the power. He had been the sun around which my life orbited, the voice that defined my worth, but not anymore. Now, I was about to face him. On my terms, in the company I had built from nothing, the company that proved just how wrong he had been. He looked smaller somehow. Standing in my reception area, shifting his weight from foot to foot, Marcus was a diminished version of the man who had once seemed larger than life. His hair was thinning, his button-up shirt wrinkled and slightly too tight across a new paunch. "Indy," he said, his voice catching. "You look amazing." "What are you doing here, Marcus?" I kept my tone neutral, professional. "I needed to see you in person." "My emails were inappropriate," I finished. "This is even more so." He flinched. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm desperate, Indy. For a moment, I saw him clearly, not as the villain of my story or the obstacle I'd overcome, but as a deeply ordinary man who had peaked too early and never recovered. I can't give you a job, I said firmly. I understand. His shoulders slumped. I wouldn't hire me either. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. You proved me wrong, he finally said, looking around at the sleek office. What you've built here, it's incredible. I didn't build it to prove you wrong, I replied. I built it because it was always in me to create something meaningful. You just couldn't see it. He nodded, eyes downcast. I was the loser in our relationship, wasn't I? Not you. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I should go, he said, turning toward the door. Thank you for not calling security. As he reached for the handle, I made a decision. Marcus. He turned, hope flashing across his face. I can't give you a job, I repeated. But I can offer you this. I took a business card from my pocket, not mine, but one belonging to the director of a nonprofit we partnered with that helped people rebuild their careers. They offer career counseling, resume workshops, interview training. Tell them I sent you. He took the card, his hand trembling slightly. Why would you help me at all? I considered the question carefully. Because I'm not defined by what you did to me anymore, I said simply. And helping others succeed is what my company stands for. After he left, I stood alone in the reception area, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The girl who had once been devastated by his rejection had become a woman who could offer him compassion without compromising her boundaries, hadn't forgiven him. But I had finally, completely, outgrown him, and that was the greatest victory of all.